Don't you just love the smell of fresh baked bread? I love to bake, and I also love experimenting with new recipes. In particular, I love to bake bread. Bread has one very important ingredient that makes it bread, and that is all bread contains some sort of leaven. Leaven that we use with bread is most commonly yeast, and there are two types of yeast that we find in the grocery store. The first type of yeast is active dry yeast, and the other is instant yeast. I want to discuss today the benefits of instant yeast. So what is yeast? Yeast is a microscopic fungus consisting of single oval cells that reproduce by budding and are capable of converting sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. So to the common baker, what that means is, as yeast is activated, it multiplies and produces carbon dioxide that causes bubbles to form, which is what makes the bread rise. Some of the uses for yeast include bread, beer, wine, food supplements, and cosmetics. When you go to the store to find yeast, you will find it either in instant yeast, which is also called bread machine yeast, or active dry yeast. Instant yeast is a smaller granule than active dry yeast. And as I put the comparison up here, you can see that the instant yeast is almost half the size of dry active yeast. And there lies your benefit, one of your benefits. The instant yeast, because of its smaller size, does not need to go through a process called proofing. Proofing is when you add yeast to warm water and sugar to start the process of multiplying. With the instant yeast, because you do not need to proof it, you can add it directly into your ingredients, your flour, your water, your salt, whatever else you're adding to your bread. Without having to proof the yeast, that is going to save you time in making your bread. And for me, I have a bunch of hungry kids, and the quicker I can put food on the table, the better. So I will take any time-saving measure that I can to make everybody happy. With the smaller granules in the instant yeast, the activation occurs during the kneading process of the dough. Now, both instant yeast and active dry yeast are interchangeable. You do not need to convert your recipe to accommodate either type of yeast. If the recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of active dry yeast, you can use 1 tablespoon of instant yeast with no conversion necessary. When you look at this graph here of how long it takes to make bread, you can see that with the instant yeast, which is the orange color, the overall time is shorter because you do not have to take that time to proof your yeast before you start baking. Instant yeast is easier to use with no proofing. It's faster because you can make your final product, you get it out of the oven quicker, and it's interchangeable. You don't have to make any adjustments. And that is why I love to use instant yeast when I bake bread.